I'll say this. Not good enough. And that is going to be the running theme of today's episode. What a weekend. Oh my God. What a weekend in sports. This one in Detroit or Michigan-based sports was a special one. Not only did you have every major team in this city outside the Red Wings who won a game, but every major team in this city lose. You had every major team in this state lose high-profile games. You had Michigan on national television. You had the Lions on national television. You had the Tigers obviously playing in the playoffs in a winner-take-all game on national television. I mean, look, losing always stinks, but embarrassing yourself at the dress rehearsal is one thing. Having your pants pulled down on stage in front of hundreds or thousands of people, that's a heck of a lot worse. And that's what we got this weekend. And I don't even know where to begin necessarily. I guess, but I do know where to begin, because before we get into the meat and potatoes of today's show, let's get these show notes out of the way. At Castellani 2014 on Twitter. We're on TikTok as well. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. We are available in audio form on Apple Podcasts. We are available in audio form on YouTube. On Spotify. Sorry. You see, we're on YouTube. We're on Spotify. You get these things mixed up. These things happen. Sorry. Nobody's perfect. And CastellaniContent.com, being updated every single day with the content that Austin and I create. If you want to go back and watch every single video from this year's Detroit Tigers season, just if you want to feel something, you can find it very easily at CastellaniContent.com. All right. I said I didn't know where to start, but I do think I have kind of a launching off point here. I'm actually going to start with the Detroit Lions, who just lost a game 30-17 on the road in Arrowhead against the Kansas City Chiefs. And I don't even really mean this as a detriment. What was, in my mind, probably the least interesting or least heartbreaking game of the weekend, because while the Lions did end up losing and their record is now 4-2, there was nothing from this game that changed the way I feel about this team or the way I feel about this regime. It was a banged-up secondary going up against Patrick Mahomes. You knew that was going to be trouble. This is a team, an organization that's still in a great place. I know they have the right coach. I know that they have the right personnel. I know that they have the right GM. Unlike other teams in this state where I'm not quite sure if I can say that, the boat doesn't necessarily need to be rocked. Lions got outplayed. And it's surprising, because I think that, to Dan Campbell's credit, the attention to detail, and this is so important. We talk about it in college, but it's even more important in the NFL. You know, it is about the little things. It's about finishing drives. It's getting first downs, converting on third and fourth down, catching passes, wrapping up, tackling, all that stuff, I think has been more often than not exquisite in the Dan Campbell era. And I fully expect that to continue. With that said, and I know I use this term very often, the screws just weren't particularly tight on Sunday against the Chiefs. And there's certain opponents like the Bengals, like the Browns, who the Lions have played, where they don't have to be. It's hard to win in this league, and the Lions have found a way to do just enough against quality opponents. They found a way to do enough against non-quality opponents. At the same time, you got to play really well if you want to win in Arrowhead. We saw a few years ago, to kick off the 2023 season, Lions came into that campaign. They got a pick six. You had, that was the famous Kadarius Toney game where he dropped like 1 million passes. Chiefs didn't play their tightest game. It was kind of the inverse of that in this particular instance. Didn't think the Lions played awful, but just so many of the pillars that we've come to expect from this organization over the last several years with the success that they had weren't quite there. The running game wasn't awful, but you never quite popped off for the big Jahmyr Gibbs or David Montgomery run. You dropped a few passes. You had a big Amon-Ra drop on fourth down. I mean, this guy's as sure-handed as they come in the NFL. That was a huge sequence. You had a penalty on 4th and goal from the 1, kind of a controversial penalty, a late penalty at the very least. I mean, even if you want to say it was the right call, it came pretty darn late. You made a few mistakes from a penalty standpoint, defensively as well. Obviously, you knew you were going to be behind the 8 ball with the banged up secondary that you had. Never really had an opportunity to get to Patrick Mahomes outside of one Aiden Hutchinson strip sack. They did a great job of playing away from 97 pretty much all night. They got outplayed. And it's frustrating because it was another opportunity, and the Lions have taken advantage of so many opportunities over the last several years with these swing games, these coin flip games where they have a chance to make a statement. They just weren't able to do it on Sunday. And like I usually don't like saying stuff like this, but the game, it mattered a lot more for Kansas City than it did for Detroit. That's not to say I felt like Detroit wasn't trying or Kansas City wanted it more, but the idea of the Chiefs falling to 2-4, 6 games into a season. I mean, when was the last time they had 4 losses, through week 10, let alone through week 6? They couldn't do it, and they showed up. I thought Mahomes was brilliant. And Lions as a whole, look, Goff was fine. They were moving the ball. They just had trouble finishing drives. And we're 6 games in, and I think the familiarity that we've had with this organization over the last several years allows us to make a much quicker assessment of what this team is. Like, this is a really good ball club. But the issues still exist. Obviously, the injuries, but I think on a night like Sunday night, the lack of a second pass rusher, the lack of a complementary pass rusher to Aiden Hutchinson really made a difference. And there's certain games, and we've seen it this year, there's certain games where no matter how you play Hutch, whether you bracket him, whether you double team him, whether you hold him on every play, or he's going to break through and just have monster games. We saw that against the Browns. We've seen it really throughout this campaign. When you're facing an offense as experienced as Kansas City, and you're facing an offensive whiz who is as well regarded as Andy Reid, they're going to play away from 97, and they did. They allowed Holmes to get out of the pocket to extend plays. He made a lot of plays with his feet. You played them tough, and you had moments where it felt like they were on the verge of getting back into the game. Laporta with an unbelievable grab to cut it to 3, but you just kind of rough around the edges. Weren't quite able to make that one stop. Weren't quite able to make that one play to kind of establish yourself. I felt like they really had an opportunity early in the game to make a statement. And look, we could talk about the controversy all we want with the penalty on Goff. They had multiple opportunities on that drive to really make a statement, punch the ball in near the goal line. They weren't able to do it. They had owned the line of scrimmage in that drive, which wasn't really something that they were able to do that much for the rest of the game. No, this could have been a 14-3 game early on, and we would have been talking about something that was completely different. I think allowing the Chiefs to have momentum going into the locker room really made a big difference. And as much as the Lions tried, they weren't able to prevail in this ballgame. No serious concerns. Disappointing moment at the end with Brian Branch with slapping Juju Smith-Schuster. And look, he owned up to it after the game, and Dan Campbell owned up to it after the game. And that is one of the areas where I think the Lions have thrived over the last several years, is that this is an organization that made a living off of stupid shit for decades. Lack of discipline, dumb penalties, dumb mistakes. Brian Branch is a wonderful player, but I think that is, up to this point in his career, and I think he'll mature, a detriment of his game is that there's a tendency to be a little bit undisciplined. Sometimes it's bad luck, a targeting call on kind of a bang play. But, in an instance like that, you got to keep your cool. And it's an emotional game. It's a frustrating game. I've seen people say that they think he might get suspended. I mean, geez, maybe this is my homerism shining through, but if you get suspended for that, I mean, come on. Look, he made a mistake, but it's an adult game. It's a man's game. So, look, it's not going to get easier. They have a huge game coming up on Monday night against Tampa. Tampa's only got 1 loss. This is the team that has played you tough when you've played them. They beat you last year at Ford Field. Obviously, you beat them in a close game in the divisional round 2 years back. Baker is having an MVP caliber season. This is another one that you circle. And as much as I have not complained, but pointed out how difficult this schedule is, man, it sure is fun. It sure is fun that you look at so many different games and they're primetime caliber games, or they're games that people circle, key matchups. And this is an organization that literally went decades without any, primetime football or any real excitement outside of a season or a half a season here or there. It feels like every week is an event. And this is the result of being the team that people are looking at. You don't win 15 games on accident like they did a year ago. You're going to get everyone's best shot. And more often than not, you're going to have one of the more difficult schedules in football, and that's going to continue. You have the extra day off. You're playing on Monday night. I fully expect Ford Field to be rocking. I expect them to beat Tampa Bay. I really do. As frustrating or as disappointing as it was to see them come up short to Kansas City, I trust this organization now. And I never thought that I'd say this, but I trust them more than any other organization in this city because I know where the culture's at. I know what the talent is. And I think their biggest issue currently is just the fact that they're banged up. I'm more inclined to believe that you can fix that as opposed to being able to fix a personnel issue or a player issue. There's a ton of talent on this roster. I expect them to continue to be successful, and I think they're going to bring it against Tampa Bay. So frustrating loss, but there's definitely more depressing stuff to talk about from this weekend. All right, let's talk about the Tigers. Tigers season is officially in the rigor mortis stage. Their season ended on Friday, and I mean, just as good an elimination game, as good a winner-take-all game as you're going to see. I actually saw some people saying, what do you mean this game was entertaining? Neither team could hit. Yeah, look, if you can't see the entertainment value in a 3-2 winner-take-all game that goes 15 innings in Major League Baseball, you might just not like baseball that much. I think it's one of the best elimination games, easily the last decade, maybe more. I sure as hell wish it would have ended differently. Tigers lose after battling back and winning Game 4, which seemed like, they were getting booed. I was at that game. Incredible experience. They rallied back, Skubal on the mound in Game 5, same way it was last year in Cleveland. Unlike last year, Skubal was vintage Skubal. 13 strikeouts over 6 innings, 1 earned run, and you get walked off in 15 frames. Look, as is the territory, and I'm not begrudging anybody for this, when you lose a playoff series and when you lose multiple close games, every decision, every move, every player is going to be analyzed and overanalyzed. And the blame game is going to be spread out among a million different people. People are going to point fingers at AJ or, this guy in the bullpen or these hitters. And look, I understand that. And the Skubal debate about whether or not he should have gone another inning. Look, I'd rather have Tarek out there than pretty much anybody else. At the same time, the one thing I will say is this is how AJ managed this team all year, which is he wanted to give Kyle Finnegan, when we acquired him, he consistently gave him the heart of the other team's order. And more often than not, when Finnegan pitched here, he was brilliant. They gave up the run, ended up going to extra innings. But this team, and this is where I do want to compliment them, they played 3 games in Seattle in this series. They gave up 9 runs in 3 games. And this was a pitching staff that we had very serious questions about the starters outside of Tarek. We had questions about the bullpen. And ultimately, when it mattered, they pitched their asses off. Holton pitched some of his best baseball of the season in the postseason. Vest is a dynamite, a nails postseason pitcher. He's 2 years in a row now. He's proved this. He's been incredible. I thought for the most part, maybe overmanaging at points, but in general, I thought AJ managed this stuff correctly. They got the most out of their pitching staff, and it just goes to show the problem here was not the coaching staff. The problem here was the pitchers. AJ and Fett going into this postseason, they knew which guys were competent, and they pitched the competent guys. You didn't see any high leverage frames from Sewald. He wasn't even on the roster, or Paddock, or any of these guys. You manage postseason games much differently, and it's such a shame because it would have been easier to swallow had I felt like the pitching staff just continued to show the inconsistencies that they showed throughout the regular season. I think for the most part, outside of one bad Jack Flaherty start in Game 3 against the Mariners, you got everything you needed from this pitching staff. You're going to give up runs, and they did. You're going up against good lineups. They pitched well enough to win this series, and they sure as hell pitched well enough to win Game 5. They went to Canely because you're running out of pitchers. It's Canely or Herter at that point. You probably are only going to give Herter the lefties. You go to Canely. You weren't feeling good about it, but you weren't feeling great about Jack either. Jack couldn't throw a strike and pitched out of it. They just made their pitches, and guys who were typically starters like Hader Montero or Troy Melton, they were unbelievable. Troy Melton was unbelievable in the series against Seattle. So Tigers still end up losing, and in heartbreaking fashion. Look, I've been very open about how random October can be and that you can win in October despite not being the best team. And I'm always going to stand by that. But this year, like all baseball seasons, was an incredibly large sample size. And when I look at how things went in this series against Seattle, and when I look at how things went down the stretch and really throughout this entire season, as you can analyze these guys who had, whole campaigns here in 2025, there is a glaring weakness that exists within the Detroit Tigers. Okay. This is not a bad team. Okay. You don't make the playoffs being a bad team. And I know how frustrating things were down the stretch, and I know that they collapsed. 87 wins, you don't do that on accident. Okay. You don't do that without having some pitching. You don't do that without having some hitting, right? And they deserve credit for that. They found their way into the postseason, and they were a hit away from making it to the ALCS this season. All right. Not a bad team. What is true is that your good players are simply not good enough, or at the very least, they're not as good as you expected them to be. Okay. In game 5, and if it was an isolated thing, I could say, oh man, baseball's hard. You know, that's tough luck. I'm not going to take a 1-game sample size and amplify it as if it speaks for the entire team. No, this is not a 1-game sample size. This was a story that I talked about in many post-game videos in the second half of the season, which is anytime they needed Torque or Green or Colt Keith or Parker Meadows or really any hitter outside of Kerry Carpenter, these guys didn't deliver. And I understand they're still relatively young. You know, Green's only going to be 25 next season. Well, you know what? Julio Rodriguez is the same age, okay? And he was one of the best hitters in baseball in the second half of the season, right? Ultimately, for years, and this was mainly an Avila thing, not a Scott Harris thing, they bragged about how good these guys were. And that, hey, you know what? I know that we sucked on purpose for years, but it won't mean anything because we got these guys, they're stars. Riley Green is going to be a perennial all-star. He's going to be a center fielder. He's going to hit 30 home runs. He's going to be a solid defender. Torque, what can you say? The guy's going to lead the league in RBIs one day. They just aren't that good. When it matters against good pitching, and even beyond that, when it matters against breaking balls, they don't have it. And it's not me saying cut them. It's not me saying get rid of them or that they aren't pieces. They're obviously pieces. Riley Green drove in 112 runs this year. But when I look at the other teams in the league, and what allowed them to separate themselves from Detroit down the stretch and into the postseason, often it was the difference between 1 or 2 hitters. This is a completely different team if you take Spencer Torkelson and you insert Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Just is, right? And I understand that Cal and Julio Rodriguez and some of these guys, they didn't have great series against Detroit, but you knew down the stretch in game 5, if this kept going, which lineup had the advantage? You knew it was Seattle's because they're just better hitters. And not all of them are homegrown, right? Arozarena, not homegrown. Jorge Polanco, not homegrown. Well, you know what? They went out and made moves at the deadline to get better, which you didn't do. And from now until eternity, and I called this before they collapsed, from now until the end of time, that deadline is going to be a brutal look for Scott Harris. They were not aggressive in the slightest, and it cost them. And how did it cost them? It cost them because in the decisive game of a playoff series, you went up against a team that made the moves that you didn't make. Yes, Suarez didn't have a great series. Naylor was a pest those last 2 games. Suarez hit a home run in game 3. It still mattered. They still had a better lineup than you did. And in the second half of the season, the book was out. This team doesn't hit breaking balls. They don't hit off-speed pitches. And Seattle's a smart team and a smart organization. They know what they're doing with their pitching. And they went out and they just fed Green and Torque, all these guys, breaking ball after breaking ball after breaking ball, saying, we're going to make you beat us this way. And they couldn't freaking do it. So, where do you go from here? The truth is, guys, and I know how frustrated fans are going to be when I say this. I'm not telling you what I would do. I'm not telling you what I want to happen. I'm telling you what's going to happen. I don't think there's going to be any major shakeups in terms of the position players here. I still think, and this drives me nuts because how much longer are we going to wait? Jesus, we're going to be 100 years old. I still think that from the beginning, Scott Harris did not view this as completely his franchise until McGonigal, Clark, and Briseño arrive. He views them as his core. Green, Torque, Colt Keith, that's Avila's core, and he's trying to make the most of it, right? I think they're going to run it back. And you know, and they believe that at some point next year, those guys are going to be available. And, you know, I guess he thinks they're going to make impacts as rookies. This is an organization that is never going to sign big-time free agents. They're not going to. They'll sign guys, but they are not going to sign guys to the deals that we want them to. They're never going to give a player like Skubal the money. They're never going to sign a Pete Alonso or an Ohtani or a Freeman. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. Again, this is not me saying what I hope for. It's me saying what I believe to be true. They've all but admitted it at this point. And so the only way that you can get superstar hitters is to develop them from within. That does not make winning impossible. I always go back to the Houston Astros, and we can talk about Houston and all the science stealing stuff. You know what? At the end of the day, the Astros made the ALCS 7 years in a row. Okay. They made the World Series 4 times. They won it twice. It's one of the greatest runs of the 21st century, probably the greatest run that we've seen by a baseball team in the 21st century. And Altuve and Bregman and Correa and Tucker and Yordan Alvarez, these guys were all developed. Springer, these guys were all developed from within. Right? Now, they lost some of them. They lost a lot of them, but they still won. If Detroit can prove themselves to have a player development system on that level, then the money you spend, or in a lot of ways, the money you don't spend, is going to be kind of irrelevant. But for the time being, when you watch this offense, it is glaring what is missing. It is glaring that at the major league level, I'm not talking about what these guys are doing down in AA, okay? You're playing in the playoffs. Fuck the minor leagues, honestly. And I think those guys are going to be great players. But this is not a situation where you're losing 100 games a year anymore. You're playing in the postseason. People are going to be paying attention to your major league product. And it became abundantly clear down the stretch and abundantly clear in the postseason that you just don't have the stars you thought you did. Find players. And you'll probably find yourself, if not back in the postseason, potentially winning the division next year. Right? I think that this team and this organization is smart enough to have found some consistency. Making the playoffs is fun. That's 2 years in a row now. And what fans are going to want to see is that next step. And that next step, is it going to come financially? I doubt it. Meaning that it's probably going to come from within. And they'll run it back next year, and hopefully they're better and they can continue to grow and develop players. But it doesn't make these losses any more frustrating, and it doesn't make this season a success. And I'm sorry. That's the most heartbreaking part of this is they were one win away from a successful season, really. But you win one more game than you did a year ago, and you end up losing in the exact same situation that you lost a year ago, which was Game 5 on the road in the postseason. I can't call it a success, man. There's players who were successful. Tarek was unbelievable, right? Certain guys had very good years. But the honeymoon period that existed here following that gritty Tigers run of 2024 is over. And I think that Scott Harris is going to become a very polarizing figure here. And I think so much of it is dependent on what happens with Tarek Skubal. And look, we're not far away enough yet from the end of the season. The emotions are still very raw. Here's what I'll say. The Tarek trade discussions are going to be discussions worth having. This isn't me saying that they're going to do it. You guys know what I want. I love the guy. He's incredible. I want him to pay him. But it's similar to the Scherzer situation. It's both similar and dissimilar. Max Scherzer was offered a deal by Mike Ilitch right before the 2014 season kicked off. He turned it down. The Tigers didn't trade Scherzer. They rolled with Scherzer in the last year of his free agent deal because the Tigers that season knew that they were going to be, if not the favorite, one of the top 3 favorites to win the World Series that year. They said, we need Scherzer on this team because we think with Scherzer on this team, we can win the World Series this year. And they didn't. But you can't tell me that going for it wasn't the right move. You only have a finite amount of these opportunities. If I felt like next year, Detroit had a team capable of making a deep run through October, winning 95 games and making noise in the postseason, I would say, hey, run it back with Tarek. If you lose him in free agency, which you probably will, it sucks, but every team's got to deal with this. I don't want you taking pitches. Swing the bat, go for it. One more round with Tarek. What I saw down the stretch here, and maybe down the stretch is not indicative of what this team is, but what I saw down the stretch was a team that wasn't good enough. And if they're not going to be good enough next year, then those discussions are worth having. Like I said, I don't want to go super deep into it right now because honestly, it would make me sad, and it still does make me sad. They had so many opportunities, and they came up short. And it wasn't a lack of effort thing. I thought they played incredibly hard, and I'm sure they were heartbroken. But man, it's It's not a great look for a team that was playing so well for so long. Were they in over their heads? A little bit. But they chose not to be aggressive. And teams like the Blue Jays, teams like the Mariners, they were. And those teams find themselves in the ALCS, which is where you failed to find yourself. So it's an organizational thing. It's a little bit of everybody outside of probably Tarek Skubal that contributed to this thing kind of falling apart. They were able to salvage it enough, but yeah, you can talk about the future being bright. You've made the postseason 2 years in a row. The present's got to be even brighter, or else the pressure is going to be turned up on Scott Harris, which I totally understand. All right, moving on. Let's talk about some college football. God, this was a rough weekend, man. Jesus. Sparty played first, but I am going to start with Michigan, probably because I have less to say about Michigan. Michigan lost 31-13 on the road against USC. Look, it was a coin flip game coming in. I think they were 2.5-point underdogs. So it's another one of those instances where the loss itself is not something that I'm coming away from saying, wow, this is horrible. This is, a bad look for the I was about to say organization. This is a bad look for the program. Everything's falling apart. No, it's not the fact that they lost. It's the fact that there was absolutely zero positives to take away from that game. So I'm just going to keep this really brief, and people can say that I'm being hyperbolic, and who knows, maybe I am, but I don't think I am. I think that in the modern age of college football, the picture becomes much more clear with coaches. Sharon doesn't have it. This isn't a well-coached team. I think the coordinator hires have either been questionable or, especially in the case of the offense, I think Sharon has a lot of say in the play calling duties. I think Chip Lindsey is an improvement over Kirk Campbell, but I also think that both OCs have to abide by certain principles that Sharon more forces them to abide by. Wink Martindale's had his moments, but the game plans here are completely non-existent, and even beyond that, there are zero adjustments in game. That's the most frustrating thing, because USC watched game film on Michigan. They said, this is a really good pass rush. Okay, it's a pass rush that we probably can't contain if our quarterback's doing 5-step drops and throwing post routes every single pass play. We're going to run screens. We're going to make throws in the flat. We're going to take their pass rush out of the game. Okay, that's a good strategy. Michigan never responded. They were running screens all day, 60 minutes, never changed. Never made an adjustment. This is not a great secondary. I know they have Rod Moore back, but the strength is their front seven, and their strength was taken out of the game, and they made no adjustments. They let USC run up and down the field, and they were lucky that this wasn't 45-13. There needs to be a statistic. There's somewhere like there's forced turnovers, but then there's just dumb, boneheaded mistakes, because USC handed Michigan an interception. They fumbled when they were about to drive in to score a touchdown. This game was not as close as the final score. This team didn't seem prepared. They didn't seem particularly energized. It didn't seem like a confident group or one that felt like they were going to win. There was never a second in that game where it seemed like Michigan was making a push. Obviously, losing Justice Haynes stinks, but there's a lot of bigger problems. And I think I'm not going to call it annoying, because I understand how the landscape and I understand the hype, but I have said a million times, and this is why you guys got to listen to me. I've said a million times, I've seen a lot of 5-star quarterbacks come through Michigan. I've seen a lot of quarterbacks come in with a ton of hype, and I've seen some succeed. J.J. McCarthy, Chad Henne. I've seen some fail spectacular, and I've seen some kind of fall in between, right? Because of the money and because of the hype, Bryce Underwood came in here with this expectation that he was going to set the world on fire. And what I said was, if you're expecting that, you're going to be sorely mistaken, because the system around him, the scheme around him, and the players around him need to be able to help him as a freshman. If we're still having these conversations 2 years from now, it's a little bit different. But this is a guy very early into his college career. And I don't think the coaching staff is putting him in great positions to succeed. He's made some mistakes. The play calling is suspect at best. I mean, I'm not giving them credit for, running the home run ball to Justice Haynes and acting like that's great offensive play calling. And this team's regressing. They've gotten worse each of the last 2 games. They peaked with the Nebraska game, which was a game they won, and a game that had me very excited, right? They didn't play well against Wisconsin, who just lost 37-0 to Iowa. I mean, if that's any indicator of how bad that team is, you were in a dogfight with them for 3.5 quarters. And then you come out on the road against USC, who's good. It's a good USC team. I don't know if it's a great team. Maybe a playoff team. I don't know. They weren't good enough to beat Illinois. I know Bielema's doing a good job. But it's more the bigger picture that scares me. I don't think that we need some abundant sample size here. And Sharon, in many ways, I think deserves to be on a shorter leash than a lot of other coaches, because Jim Harbaugh, as fun as the end of that era was, as fun as winning is, and as great as that national championship was, he didn't leave them in a great spot. You know, that they were in no position to really do some big outside search. Sharon had coached half the games, 1/3 of the games, was the winning coach, the head coach for, part of Michigan's 2023 run. I couldn't be mad at Ward Manuel for promoting Sharon Moore to head coach. But I had dinner with my dad the night before Michigan kicked off their season in 2024 against Fresno State. And I said to him, look, last year was incredible. We still have no idea if Sharon Moore knows how to coach. And right now he doesn't. Maybe in the future he could, but this isn't some fucking Michigan Works program. Like this is a major university and a major college brand. And right now you've lost 7 games in 2 years with many more losses. You're not beating Ohio State this year. Last year was Ohio State just pooping their pants. Okay. You're not going to beat that team this year. They're arguably better than they were a year ago. Right. I mean, you're going to have a dogfight against Washington this week. You're looking like a team right now that's probably going to get worse before things get better. And I understand the recruiting and all that. Guys, Michigan's always recruited. They've recruited my entire life. The Hoke recruited. Rich Rod was the weird exception. That was just a poor fit. But Hoke recruited. Carr recruited. Harbaugh recruited. Sharon's recruiting. Talk about it with the Tigers. Player development matters even more. And I think there's a lot of talent here. There's tons of talent here. Guys are going to play in the NFL. But as a unit, they're not playing inspiring football. You got some good luck in the portal going out and getting Haynes. That's awesome. When he's played and been healthy, he's been fantastic. Looked like maybe the wide receiver core is coming along a little bit, but you're relying on a true freshman. Andrew Marsh right now is probably your best wideout. That's how thin that room is. And defensively, they're not as good as they should be. It's not a bad defense, but there's a lot of very talented players, good talented pass rushers. Good front seven. These guys should be swarming. They're not. That was a confident USC team that we saw on Saturday. So I don't think he has it. And the sad truth is that the rest of their schedule isn't super difficult. So they're going to go 9-3, 8-4. They'll run it back with this thing next year. And we're going to have these same conversations. We saw it last season, and they bought themselves time with the Ohio State and Alabama wins at the end of the season. And what they bought was me raising the question saying, okay, maybe it was just a bad campaign. Maybe it was just as simple as you didn't have a quarterback. Maybe they were able to make it work those last 2 games, and those last 2 games are a better indicator of what Sharon Moore really is. And it's not. I'm not even mad at the guy. He's done a great job as a coordinator. He was part of the national championship team. As far as I'm concerned, you're aces in my book. I just don't think he's head coach. And I don't think things get a ton better. And even if they do get better, so what? I hate to pull the Brady Hoke card, but this is Michigan. The one thing I always appreciate about Michigan fans and their administration is that, they don't like going 8-4 every year. They're going to hold their team to a high standard. And I think that's great. They should continue to. And if they're going to continue to, that means that Sharon's seat should probably be getting pretty warm, because I just don't see it. And people can say that I'm jumping to conclusions. I think we are very quick to forget how much of a disaster last year was until they got to Columbus and Ohio State forgot Jeremiah Smith was on the roster. Like, it was nothing but question marks until an ugly rock fight win. And it was a great win against Ohio State. Besides that, disastrous year 1. I'm not at the point right now of calling this a disastrous year 2, but I'm not seeing the progressions that I wanted to see. And I think a lot of the fan base feels very similar. I'll stick with the negativity. Let's talk about the Michigan State Spartans, who just got demolished. What was the score? 38-13, I think, against UCLA. They didn't seem to really care enough to put in the effort. Therefore, I don't really care enough to go on Google and look up what the actual score was. I watched the game, unfortunately. Man, I don't even know where to begin. And this is trauma left over from the D'Antonio era. I still don't want to sit here and rip Michigan State until I see Michigan beat them, which I think they will. Even if they do, I would argue at this point that's the worst thing that could happen, because I came into the season thinking Michigan State wasn't going to be that good. I was unimpressed by what they did in the portal. I felt like Childs would probably take a step forward. Marsh was going to be excellent, and they would stay in some games with that connection. I figured at worst, they would be a slightly improved unit from last season. 5-7 last year. I figured worst case scenario, you go 6-6. I would say best case scenario, I think this was what Mike Valenti talked about, 8-4 with one signature win, whether it's on the road against Iowa, against Michigan, what have you. This is a team that right now you can make a strong argument is the worst in what is a giant Big Ten. Their defense is pitiful and regressing. Childs isn't playing well, and I don't really put that all on him. The guy's taking a beating. I mean, how healthy is he at this point? But even beyond that, did they practice last week? I mean, I'm watching this game against UCLA, and look, maybe UCLA is better than the 0-4 record that they had. And I'm probably willing eventually they were. Like they fire their coach, they fire Foster, they have Skipper take over, Neuheisel's the OC. Maybe they are better. Maybe they got Nico going at QB. That's entirely possible that they're okay or passable, right? But guys, I mean, to win by 4 or 5 touchdowns, to be non-competitive the entire game against a team that 2 weeks ago people were saying might not win a game on their schedule. I mean, this was your easiest remaining game, and you got boat raced. I feel like I'm just being a hot take artist here, but I can't deny what I'm seeing on the field right now, and I can't deny the weak energy that's radiating off of this program right now. Jonathan Smith is a bad fit. It's a bad hire, and it's not working at all. And I think he is completely shell-shocked. I think he's a West Coast guy who's similar to Rich Rod at Michigan, is a little bit shocked by the intensity of the job. I think that he thought he could come here, have a few years to figure it out, go 7-5, 8-4 every year like he was doing in Corvallis, and be considered the toast of the town. That's not what they want here. They want to be competitive. They want to compete with Michigan. They want to play with the big boys. And look, I think that Michigan State football in its current form is capable of being a top 5-10 team in the country, capable of playing with Ohio State and Penn State and Michigan when they're good, or Oregon? No. But I got to respect the fan base a little bit. They know that they're better than this. They know that they're better than getting walloped by a completely subpar UCLA team at a 40% full Spartan Stadium, which is probably about 39 to 40% more than they deserved over the weekend. It's not working out. And I think this probably ends with him going back to Corvallis. I think Oregon State just fired their head coach, and I think that would be Jonathan Smith's salvation. I don't think he's a bad guy. I just think that he is not a needle mover at all. And I think that as much as Michigan State wants to make a splash with their coaching hires, and still can, I think that if you want to coach at Michigan State, you need to have some understanding or prior knowledge of what Michigan State football is, an understanding of the Big Ten, an understanding of the Michigan State rivalry. You can't be a jellyfish. You can't come away from your first game against Michigan and say, well, I didn't know how intense it was, but I sure as hell know now. He's not saying the right things. But even beyond that, the thing that people were hoping for, which is a return to toughness, a return to physicality, a return to some sort of identity, it's not there. I mean, the things that people complained about in the Tucker era have gotten worse. No secondary play. You're not getting the ball out. No pass rush. That's back. It's all on full display. And with guys like Childs and Marsh, I mean, especially Childs, he's reaching a point where it's like, buddy, I think this guy can be a pretty good quarterback. He's got nothing around him. He's got one receiver, 1.5 receivers. He's got no offensive line. It's getting so bad, you're reaching a point where guys are going to be entering the portal midseason if this continues. And I think it's going to continue. I don't know where the salvation is going to come from. If there was going to be a tune-up game, if there was going to be a let's get right game, it would have been UCLA. And, I mean, you're running a pitch play on your own side of the field on 4th and 1 and getting stuffed. UCLA is driving down the field. Your defense is Swiss cheese. You got your coach standing on the sideline, zero intensity. Yeah, it's not working. It's not working. Look, I don't care. I'd be fine with him coaching Michigan State every game for the next 100 years. But even as skeptical as I am about what the Michigan State football program can be, just because I don't believe that they are capable of returning to the heights that they reached under D'Antonio. Not that level of consistency where you have a 3-year period where you're a top 5 program. But they're a heck of a lot better than this. And I think Jay Batt is seeing that as well. And for what it's worth, I don't think, unless there is some crazy turnaround, I don't see him lasting to the end of the year. And that's shocking. I would not have expected that coming into the campaign because I thought this guy was a serviceable coach. I figured that he would stabilize things for a minute, but ultimately his good would not be good enough and he would end up being relieved of his duties. Good not being good enough would be best case scenario at this point. I mean, you are quite possibly the worst team in the Big Ten at this point, and I don't think I'm bothering any Spartan fan by saying this. People were vitriolic with their contempt this weekend, and time really flies, but you've come up on a decade almost in which you've been a completely mid-football program with one incredible season mixed in where you had the best player in college football. Besides that, there might be a win over Michigan here or there. You beat them in the COVID year, but you've lost to Michigan 3 years in a row. I would imagine it's going to be 4. You haven't played in a bowl game since that Kenneth Walker season. I mean, there's being on the outside looking in, and then there's being below that. You're in that third tier. Rutgers is more competitive than you right now. Minnesota is more competitive than you right now. We saw on Saturday, UCLA is more competitive than you. UCLA, they got 5 people at their games. In Bel Air, beautiful weather. People still don't give a shit. That's how rotten things have gotten. I didn't mean to rhyme that, but in East Lansing. And I'm surprised by it. I didn't expect it to get this bad. And I think that if they have a blowout loss to Michigan, which I don't know if Michigan's good enough to blow anybody out at this point, I think it's a Bobby Williams scenario where he would be let go potentially midseason. I really think it's gotten that bad. They looked to me on Saturday like a team that was quitting on their coach. And that's the worst place you can be in. So, golly, what a weekend. Holy shit. Rough show, man. I mean, look, I think the episode was fine, but boy, oh boy, lots of frustration. And I call them as I see them. And you guys saw what I saw with all these teams. It was here's what I'll say about the Tigers, man. At least you're in the playoffs. At least you are. With the Tigers, at least I can be frustrated with the fact that their good isn't good enough. Whereas some of these other teams, it's you got a long ways to go before even being respectable. So, boy, oh boy. All right, you can follow me on Twitter at Castellani2014. On TikTok as well. We're now over 11,000, actually. I think 11.5 thousand, which is really cool. Let's keep getting those numbers up. YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Available in audio form on Apple Podcasts, available in audio form on Spotify, and CastellaniContent.com is being updated every single day with the content that Austin and I create. And shout out to Austin Sisler, who continues to do a wonderful job. It was great taking him to Game 4 of the ALDS. That's why it sucks it's over, man. We made some really great memories this year. Look, who cares? Ultimately, it's the rest of the world that kind of decides this stuff. I've never been more proud of the content that we put out than I was with what we did this year and have continued to do. And we're going to have an episode of Chris Company this week with Logan Reaver. We're going to get back to that, but I'm kind of hurting because I'm genuinely going to miss doing the Tiger stuff. I feel so at home with those fans and this team. And we're going to continue. We got Lions stuff. We got college football. The clock's going to keep ticking. The train's going to keep rolling. But there was a lot of fun this year. And I think that we've grown a lot. And I've had to. And again, a lot of that's for other people to decide whether or not I've grown. But I don't think that what we're doing now I would have been intellectually or emotionally capable of doing 2-3 years ago. And maybe that gets us somewhere. Maybe it doesn't. But the one thing I'm not going to do is stop trying. So I love you guys and appreciate you. I will talk to y'all again real soon. Have a great rest of your week. Peace and happiness.